Well, here we are. Pat's Interference, Pat's Chat, special joint episode. First one. I hope we do more. I'll say that on the front end. I don't know how this is going to go, but I hope we do more. The Patriots, of course, hope they're not going to repeat anything anytime soon. Not because of what Doug and I reported today, inside story you can find at the Boston Herald, or anything that Michael Hurley's done to them by showing up for their last game when they won and they were supposed to lose. But we're here to break it down. And, of course, talk about Mike Vrabel, who might be the Patriots head coach by the time we wrap here today. Simple question, Doug, because you and I have talked more than I think we've talked to anyone else on planet Earth over the last 2-3 days. The story's out. Everything we know is out. Everyone's read it. I haven't asked you this question. From all the things that we learned talking to people in the front office and on the staff and in the locker room and other places around the team, what stood out most when we finally answered the question to you of like, hey, what the hell happened here?
I think my number one takeaway is that there really was a divide within the building about how people felt about Jerod Mayo. There was people who were fully supportive. I think the players really liked him a lot. I think some coaches in front office, and then basically like the coaches in front office were essentially split on how they felt about him and the job they did. The performance that he did, how he prepared himself, how he interacted with other people. So I think that's why maybe there was some questions by the end of the season of how the Patriots would handle this, what the Crafts would do, how they would move forward, if they would go with Jerod Mayo or if they would fire him. So it did seem like opinions really changed by the winter, like November, December. That's when it seems to really sway towards firing Jerod Mayo. But that was really the number one takeaway. Like there were people that we talked to who were 100% supportive of the job that he did, felt like he deserved another year, felt like he needed more time. And there were others that were straight up, I would say, relieved over the decision that Robert Kraft made.
Hurley, what stood out to you?
Yeah, I would say, you guys clearly, now first this is cool because you have Herald journalist Andrew Callahan, Herald journalist Doug Hyde, and just random guy, Mike Hurley. So this is like I won a contest. So thank you guys.
World famous Pat's Chat host, but also basement man, and judging by the lack of light in your house, might have recently converted to being Amish. Yes.
Yes, dude. The basement was too cold. I had to move upstairs. I didn't know it was so dark. We're gonna move on. I would say I read your story. It was clear how much legwork went into it. How you tried to turn over every stone, and my takeaway was sort of there was no massive incident or a huge scandal or certain things that just where it had to be done. It felt like more you painted a picture of a head coach who wasn't very good and didn't offer much inspiration to the powers that be that it would improve as quickly as it needed to. Maybe I took some of my own estimations into that, but that was my main takeaway. And then the other one was that probably for the first time, and maybe it's happened on like radio and things like that. In the building, it feels like some eyes are looking up at the owner's box saying, hey, what the hell? What's going on here? Whether that's coaches, whether that's players, whether that's whatever, because the shield is gone in Bill Belichick. And I think this being Robert Kraft's hire and it not working out, there's more skepticism and leery eyes looking up there than I think I was probably thinking of this week. So, I know that's the way the story ended, but there was a quote in there early on, decisions are made by guys in their 80s who don't know really much about football. It stood out to me. So those are my two takeaways.
Yeah, it's always the 80-year-old white dude. It's just in this instance, the offense is not knowing the football, which is what you're presiding over. Look, I don't know. It feels like at the best self-involved, at the worst douchey to be like, oh, my take is big away from this story I co-authored with my colleague.
Take is big away.
Yeah, but I just think
someone's tired.
Is what you mentioned at the end, Hurley, is also counter reflection of the fan base, right? Like everyone's been crying and looking at the Crafts, being like, how could you let this happen? Why is this so dysfunctional? Brady's gone, Belichick's gone. There's no more shield now. There are no more people to fire unless you just truly want to commit to this bit of being the AFC Panthers, right? Like Jerod Mayo's gone. That was a plan for years. So what are you going to do next? And in the same way that people are on the outside are mad, media members included, pointing out all the flaws and bad decisions, like it is inside the building. So it doesn't inspire a ton of confidence moving forward. But when you look at Jerod, it was consistently bad in the media. It was consistently bad behind the scenes. We knew that. How it manifested, though, in like all these different corners of the building, you go, he's in charge of most of it, and it is his fault, as people told us. but like this was bigger than him, bigger than any one person. And if it was going to be one person, you would start at the top with ownership.
Yeah, and I do think the quote that Michael was talking about earlier, even the second part of it of there's no board to answer to anything. We're in a unique business. Like unless you hire a hiring consultant firm like the Jets have done with the 33rd team, it genuinely is like obviously people who own NFL teams for 30 years know a lot about the business, know a decent amount about football just by being around it for 30 years. But it is kind of wild that those are the guys who are making these ultimate decisions of like, oh, I like the way he handled himself on a flight back to Israel. Like he's gonna be our head coach in 5 years. And that's, I think part of the reason why that didn't work out is that there was trusting the instincts on it and maybe not, Robert Kraft likes to say that he likes to measure 9 times and cut once. And maybe that wasn't the best example of him doing that with Jerod Mayo, especially since it's come out since then that they kind of rushed this a year early, that they wanted Bill Belichick to coach for one more year and then have Jerod Mayo take over. And in order like to rush it like that, and it really did seem like that was a lot of Jerod Mayo's problem, is that he didn't always have the confidence of everyone within the building. And there were a couple of different quotes on that. On one where like, Jerod was the highest of the highs after wins, lowest of the lows after losses.
Someone shot his dog. That's how he
right.
That's how
Bouncing off the
walls. Does he have a dog?
And
not anymore.
right. Yeah. Not after losses. But then like the quote basically being like after the Bengals game that, okay, we were all sitting inside the building watching the tape and being like, oh my God, we got lucky. Like that, this is not sustainable. This is not going to work for the rest of the year. And I mean, that was a major takeaway, I think, even for Andrew and I this season, of just listening to Jerod after that win over the Bengals and being like, I don't know if this is going to keep happening. Like, I guess get all the excitement out now, but then also just the quote about like talking about all the North Stars and people inside the building being like, what are they? Are you going to share them with us? Like, what are these North Stars? And
well, you gotta look out the front windshield, as we've established.
Yes. And I mean, we've kind of joked that I think that Jerod said that like, or someone said the North Star is always moving or something like that. And it doesn't.
Robbie Glazer did in an NFL Network piece that like, look, the league owns the network, employs the reporter who wrote it. So when I say puff piece, this is not like slamming that particular person. It's just how those things go. Oh, come in the building, we'll tell you. And we understand if certain things you are supposed to see, you're not going to write about them. That's not what we're doing here, right? But that in that piece in April, that's how it was put, of like Robin Glazer. Oh, it's the thing that's always moving, but it's the one thing that we're chasing. The North Star, famously fixated in the northern direction. There are two things you kind of lightly hit on there. I want to throw you to Hurley. Like pick one, because related to this is the idea that early on we were told, hey, if they beat the Chargers or they hold on in Arizona, or even those games are close, the Crafts might just run this back. That's how close this was. This big sweeping decision came down to really just kind of 2 games. Number 2 is there was someone, and this didn't make the story, so this is for everyone hanging out here in the special Pat's Interference Pat's Chat podcast, had shared with me someone I would describe as pro Mayo. Look, the Crafts had been around less this year than really the last 20 years or so. Team meetings. And they felt, whether this person was right or wrong, that the issues that we all talked about in the media, his flubs, inconsistencies, etc. The football was bad, don't get me wrong, were issues not to the football team, but impressed upon ownership. And they were worried about like, hey, like, yeah, it's annoying and distracting for players, but that's a losing season. And they felt issues as we portrayed them that might have related to ownership fueled the decision that he thought was different from the football, even as bad as it was. So like, which of those two, the Crafts making a decision based on fan and media impressions versus even if they did decide on the football, this could have been flipped by 6-8 quarters.
I mean, it's all kind of together because I'm thinking there, if they came out and lost in Arizona but looked competent, and if they lost 30-7 instead of 40-7 of the Chargers, are we having this podcast? And that's
right.
I don't know.
That's where you have to wonder about the decision making and why it's happening and why this was. We were live, Doug, when the statement went out, like Jerod Mayo is staying with the Patriots. It was that weirdest statement of all time. And it was clearly decided like, this is going to be our guy. and that's years ago now, that it could all come down to this was a game, and they won 4 games. I think optimistically, we were looking at 7 at best, worst 3. And they're like still in that range. So to me, it was more about everything going on in there. And Doug, you mentioned the comment. I wanted to get on that one, the Bengals game, and how he was basically saying, like, we can run on anyone. You can't stop the run. I haven't watched that game in months. I remember Mike Gesicki fumbling 1 inch from the goal line. And I remember Joe Cardona sticking his helmet through the football on a punt. And it's like they won that game by 3. Was it 15-12? Was that the score or something like that?
16-10.
16-10, yeah.
Same thing. The point is that game, and it remember a year ago, I think it was a Wickersham story when it was like the end of Belichick and all that. And it got into Mayo carried himself a certain way. And I credit you guys for not going full drama the way our friend Seth does, because he's really good at it. But sometimes it's a little dramatic. But that comment there kind of made me like, the way Jerod carried himself was noticed not just by whoever was talking about, but coaches on this year's staff. It feels like, where it's just sort of like, guy, we barely won that game. Where were you? Like, were you at the game? And it's just kind of jarring that was the culture. So to me, to answer your question, the culture wasn't what was expected. But man, it's a little scary to think if they played better in those 2 losses, you wouldn't even have this conversation, because you're supposed to be doing what's best for the franchise, not what happened last week.
I'll also say that, I think that some of the concerns over Mayo predated him even becoming a head coach, of people that I talked to, of like, people were like, all right, I mean, we'll see how this goes, because we wrote in the piece that like, sometimes he wouldn't necessarily, he like ask for advice, but not necessarily listen to it. And that wasn't unique to him being a head coach. And I don't want to pile on Mayo on this or whatever, but I think it does speak ultimately to ownership giving him the job before he was ready for it. And maybe once he took the job, not changing and adjusting as much. But I did want to bring up one other thing, where one of my other main takeaways was talking to people. It still feels like some people on the team, in the organization, are like thinking that everything went fine almost. And maybe that's over exaggerating, but like one person that I talked to, like the first words out of their mouth were basically like, what did you think was going to happen this year? Like, what was your expectations? And I was like, I mean, honestly, I expected you guys to win about 4 games, but I also expected you guys to start getting better over the course of the season. And it seemed like things were worse by the end. But then something that same person said by the end was like, yeah, in the last 4 games, we played well in 2 of them. We didn't play well in the other 2. And you would like to be better than 50-50 in those games. And like, it's true, but they also lost 3 of the games. So it's like, I think that was more kind of comparing it to like the Dan Campbell situation with the Lions. Saying like, they won 3 of their last 3. Well, we played well in 2 of our last 4.
And we won the game we should have lost ultimately for the franchise. The
backups, and you still lost the game that you got, it seems like maybe it'll take a while, but maybe there's not full accountability from everyone within the building at this point.
No, there's not. I mean, and it goes for players who were specifically called out in a quote in the story. It goes for coaches whom a player called out saying, I think discipline was the big deal here, right? Like, we're cutting corners, and that was kind of the story of what happened with Mayo. And then even some in the front office, where Elliot Wolf tells me on the record in September, kind of a throwaway question for me, hey, I'm going to ask you about tanking, what you think about the roster, where things are going next, state of the union kind of stuff before the season. And the throwaway was, hey, where do you think you could improve? Like, this is a new job for you, but you've been around forever. And he's like, I think I could be more assertive. Like, I could, be more aggressive was the word he used. And someone in the team goes, he's got to put his foot down more, like not listen to the coaches as much. And so inconsistency happens, losing happens. It is curious to me, though, that Doug, and I don't know what you're going to say to this. We need to take a break. And then your answer on the other side. We experience the culture day to day in the locker room, talking to people off record during the season. We knew it was bad. From what we've gleaned the last 72 to 96 hours, was this worse than we even knew, being in the building almost as much as anyone who is a part of the team? Your answer next. You know what? It's sad. Football season, pretty much over. But you can still play and win with a new game. Prize Picks, the best place to get real money sports action anywhere. And I'm talking up to, get this, 1,000 times your cash. Go to Prize Picks right now, where everyone can have fun with daily fantasy sports. It's the most accessible. It's the simplest app out there. All you have to do, pick 2 to 6 players. Each comes with a stat. You look at their next game. You think they'll get more or you think you'll get less. Lock it in, and there it is. You can have a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash by picking as few as 2 players. If you sign up today, you get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, 50 for just $5. You don't even need to win to get the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. So download the app today. Use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game.
So I would say,
I didn't realize my voice cracked at the end there, so we need to rerun that.
Football season's over.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I would say worse. And because we talk to a lot of these people throughout the season, obviously, like we're not just like, oh, let's talk to everyone at the end of the season. But I do think that people hide some of their true feelings when you're talking to them during the season because they don't want to paint the team in a bad light. They don't want to, they don't want like a negative story around the team when it's still ongoing. But 100%. Then after the season, when things happen and things change, then you get the real story of how people feel. So that's why I would say it was worse. I mean, I would also say that just like simply the Tavai situation at the end of the year illustrated more than anything that the culture was worse than we thought, just because it's like, how do you not get this under control? Like how is he speaking 3 times on this manner and never apologizing and continuing to double and triple down? So that's another aspect. I would just say like, they really needed to rein in the control of the players. It never happened, even though I think there might have been some attempts to do it, but in the long run, like it just never happened.
Can I tell you guys when it was over for me, when I knew it'd be over? I quickly Googled. It was earlier than I thought. It was
April.
It was September 27th. I'm trying. That might be it. I felt it was a little bit later, but there was a press conference, and it had become clear that Jerod Mayo during games didn't do a lot of talking. Had the headset on, as we know, had a lot of channels going on, which he was flicking back and forth on, but was not really coaching the football team. And it was a press conference like midweek, maybe Friday, and I think it was Taylor Kyles who might have asked him. I forget who. Was like, hey, do you talk during the game? And it was, I think, an honest question, but I was just like, well, that's not good for the coach. That's not a good sign when you're drawing Jim Caldwell comparisons right off the bat. And that's where I think Mayo messed up when he said he should be more aggressive. It's like, you have to have a vision and then impress upon people what that vision may be. And as you guys mentioned, I don't think anyone knew what that vision was. And so how could he impress it upon people if he didn't know what it was himself?
Yeah, and I've said this before, like the less talent you have, the more coaching matters. So even within, the margin of error of like, oh, he's a rookie and he'll excuse this and that and he'll learn. Like the most damning part about this was the regression in the middle of the season, not just with an on-field product where that supposedly crossed the line for the Crafts, but in the fact that Mayo himself became an error repeater in the process. And that was something that in talking to people, it was sometimes a little bit jarring, being like, oh, what did you expect? Of course it was going to go bad. I'm like, well, you can not botch an end of season clock management against the Dolphins in week 5, which was the first like, whoa, you got out coached. And they pivot to Drake and that covers them for a little bit. Jacksonville, the culture comes up. Javon Baker, yes, missed curfew, missed bed check down there. Tyquan Thornton later in the season just doesn't show up to the facility, gets cut 2 days later. And Mayo's giving cover to those guys. And someone else in the locker room was like, why are we doing this? Like, if it's bad behavior, we can call that out. Like, that's very fundamental, easy stuff. And where, like, it wasn't just the on-field product, but Mayo's messaging, to Doug's point at the end, like, you're not getting through your players of sometimes just shut up. Like, that's what this needs to be. Because he wanted to see so much to them eye to eye. But sometimes with other people in the organization, kind of look down upon them, which lost the message with other people within the team. But with players, it was like, well, if I'm always seeing eye to eye with you, I feel like I don't need to explain as much.
Yeah, and I think that some of the loss of a overall vision was just the fact that he did want this to be a player-led team, that he wanted to put the players in charge. And there are people within the building who still think that was a good idea for him to do. But ultimately, And someone said this, like, Jerod should have known better than anyone that they didn't necessarily have the leaders to do that. Like, and especially that was the case when Juwan Bentley went down for the season and David Andrews went down for the season. But even with those guys healthy, yeah, it helps to have, one or two really strong leaders on your team. But like in 2014, let's say, like when you had like Tom Brady, you had Jerod Mayo, you had Devin McCourty, you had like 5 or 6 of these types of guys. And then this year you're like trying to fill gaps by throwing guys a captain's patch and like, hey, you get to be a captain. Oh, this guy's out for the season. No, you get to be a captain. It's like, and even still, I think guys who never even reached captaincy for probably a good reason still wound up being the most vocal ones on the team and wound up kind of taking over, maybe not leadership, but as someone said in the story, like they wound up being influencers in the locker room. And those wound up being overall like selfish players who were kind of thinking out for themselves, but they're among the eldest players on the team. So they almost automatically become leaders at that point. So, obviously some people think that it was a good idea at first to be that player-led organization, player-led team, but it did feel like at a certain point, Jerod probably should have said like, hey, this isn't working. I've got to step in and be that leader and have this be, I guess, a coach-led team rather than a player-led team.
Can you guys help me out? Is there a team in the NFL that's player-led? Because I think of like players, coaches, like guys that aren't hard, like Sean McVay, Mike McDaniel. But the team very much follows their instruction. They are almost sort of anal about every detail and facet of the X's and O's. Is there a team where it's like, oh, the players got this? I can't imagine that working.
Well, I think what that means is, hey, when the coaches aren't in the room, we're not, if you're the coach running the meeting, how are the players acting when they're on their own? Like, do you have that enforcer? I mean, the Patriots very intentionally have that locker that's next to the exit, passed down Dante Hightower now to Juwan Bentley, and I think maybe Willie McGinnis before it. I might be screwing up ex-Patriots veteran.
Junior Seau too, I think had it. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. And that is to say, if you want to leave early, you got to go by that guy. And he's going to tell you exactly why this is an issue, because that's what the coach would say. So I think it's more of just, like any organization, like the people below are a reflection on the leader. In this case, sometimes some of, Jerod's more immature and selfish impulses. Oh, hey, we just gave up 40 points to the Chargers, but hey, the run defense was good. But in that case, like player led, once you hand the power over or empower them, like you lose a little bit of control. So that trust, I think, was just unearned, to Doug's point, in addition to some bad luck where you're like, well, we trust David Andrews. He's been a captain forever. We trust Juwan Bentley, even Jabril Peppers, Jacoby Brissett. All 4 of them were gone for very different reasons by week 6. What did you do after that? Well, not much. And that's when we all started to realize, this culture is falling apart.
Yeah. I don't think he had the roster to have that sort of mentality toward his first time. It's your first chance coaching, and you're like, oh, well, I can lean on some of these guys. You just don't have the locker room for it. One thing, you just mentioned there, I'm disappointed in you guys, if you don't mind me. And it's not your fault. It's not your fault because no one said it. But I would have liked to hear some people. Doug and I spent many hours on our podcast here saying, well, if you take away the 73-yard run and if you take away the 75-yard pass, we actually did pretty good. I wish there were some people on the staff that were like, I hated when he did that. That's all. I just wish someone in the building was as bothered by that as we were.
I mean, there probably was. Maybe we just didn't specifically ask about it, but I mean, even by the end of the season, people were telling me like we just can't get out of our own way. Like they felt like they just kept shooting themselves in the foot, and that was related to the Tavai thing. But I mean, I think that they're very aware inside the building of like what people are saying to the media, what missteps they're making, and how it continues to embarrass the organization. And like, I actually would even say, I do think that some people on staff, maybe not 100%, but do feel like the media is partially to blame for what went down. And I mean, I think, I don't even know how to respond to it fully, but I do think that there reached a point this season where like we could no longer ignore what was happening. That it would have been a disservice to be like, no, everything's fine. Just give him another year. Because as Andrew said, it was repeated errors over and over and over again. At a certain point, you just have to address those.
Well, and it was one thing for me to highlight in March at the owners' meetings. Hey, there's some media messaging here that's not great, but he'll learn from it. Okay. And that's all we had to go from in March. When you get to September and October and you're screwing up the easy part. Like there are people in that room every Wednesday, every Friday when the head coach speaks that in their hearts, let's be honest, are really pulling for a win that Sunday. That's fine. But if you can't sway them, if you're screwing up in front of them, why do I trust you as a head coach, leader of men, to be able to deliver a clear and concise message and expectations for what's going on? Because his expectations as delivered to us always went back and forth a little bit. And I think that got to be the issue. Now, on the media side, yes, I think there was a detachment, especially after that first win, which in retrospect, tell me if I'm wrong, either of you, might have been the worst thing to happen to this team because it changed expectations. They won in an unsustainable way. That was obvious to everyone except for Jerod initially. And then he came around once there was
and Robert Kraft. You remember his comment in the locker room?
Right. And Kraft, too, even in the offseason, is talking about like, oh, I hope we win some games. I just don't want us to struggle. Hey, pal, you're headed for the number 1 overall pick. Most people knew it. If not that, top 5, top 10. And so everything goes, well, they just play smart. They're back to Patriot football, but it's modern. And yeah, I got on board with some of that. But I had a quote from someone, and we had in the story. It kind of eroded after week 2, right? Like you can't run the ball when you're down as they were double digits to Seattle or all these other teams. So I think it might have been the worst thing, but expectations, everything just got exaggerated and louder a little bit with the media. So I think that's fair. But everything, culture, messaging, Mayo, whatever, starts with the football on the field. And that wasn't good enough. And it started with the best game of the season being the first, and I would argue, in retrospect, for the long-term vision, the worst.
I think the media thing, too, is more than just like what you guys write in the paper or what they say on the radio or whatever. It's the larger scale things. Did Sunday Night Football come calling? Did Monday Night Football come calling? They were not a draw. I'd love to see the weekly ratings and compare it to even last year or the year before, because the Miami game in Miami was maybe the worst Patriots game I can remember, where it was just, I left to bring my daughter to a birthday party in the second quarter because I was like, I would like to watch this with a skip 30 button because of how painful it is to sit here. And I'm sure I'm not alone. Like there's this cultural change where things that were happening in the region on Sundays were not happening for 20 years. You know, schools are planning outings with their kids, like, you know, fairs or whatever, you know, whatever, 3:00 on Sunday. These things were never happening forever. And it's part of the Patriots. They're not falling out of, you know, favor or whatever, but they're not nearly as important to everyone as they used to be. And I think that is a factor too, where last year, it got made fun of a million times, like the Sunday night promo, Belichick versus Von Miller or whatever they did. But they didn't even have that. So I think it's like, yeah, you know, the daily coverage is going to reflect what they're doing on the field. But the fact that they've dropped into a sort of irrelevance, I think probably shocks them a little more.
Yeah, I mean, my daughter has like a school pajama day on Sunday this year. And it's like, I feel like in the past, they might have been like, that might be a Patriots playoff game. Let's not plan that on a Sunday. And now, and like, obviously that's a small example, but you're right. Like it does seem like interest was waning. We saw that for sure with the attendance in the last 2 weeks of the season. And you were probably there, Michael. Yeah, not you. You're not to blame there.
I paid $50 American to sit on the 22nd row, which is like 30 more than I wanted. But what are you going to do?
Were you cheering or booing?
I was observing, Andrew. Okay. I wanted to get a vibe of what everyone was feeling in there. And you know what it was? Complete and utter indifference. It was just people hanging out with their friends and families and talking. And there was like these random football players doing random football things.
Yeah,
it really was. Like even the touchdown, Joe Milton did a backflip. I'm like, that was cool. And I don't know how many people were even watching. It was a sad scene.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that obviously ownership is going to see that, because if, first of all, like they get the money anyway because of season ticket, like the game was technically sold out. So they get the money anyway for that. But like concessions, merchandise, like when you go to a Patriots game, you don't see the jerseys of many current players.
You see a lot of Jones with a piece of tape above it that says May.
Right. Or you see Brady, or you see Edelman, or you see Gronk. You see jerseys that were bought 10 years ago. So that's not money coming in for ownership as well. So I think like that, I guess it all plays into outside factors that would be like fans, media, all these things. But ultimately, it is the product on the field. And like we were talking about earlier, I do think that winning that week 1 game was probably the worst thing that could have happened. But I mean, what's the alternative? That they go 3-14 and one of their 3 wins is against backups? Like, I'm still not sure if that cures the issue of Mayo getting fired at the end of the year.
I think
if they lose that game.
Just flip that with not blowing a lead to Jacksonville when they were on the verge of firing their coach, and like maybe things progress a little more normally. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, and what happened in between, or I should say what didn't happen in between, is also the story of the season. Like, it's one thing to regress. It's another to have a rookie head coach and defensive coordinator and offensive play caller and GM. They didn't develop the rookie players on the field. Like, Jalen Polk had 2 catches after that Jacksonville game. And we had someone we spoke to who pushed back against, well, they weren't that good. It's not that he wasn't developing. He just wasn't as good as Kendrick Bourne and Keyshawn Boutte. I'm like, it's not a high bar to clear, but he did start week 1. And so I think when you look at the state of the organization, it's not just saying, as players told the world last year, you're 29th out of 32. Ownership gets a D. It's the worst weight room in the league. And as we know from talking to people, there's basically no sports science. There's no analytics. Like, they need an upgrade here. But to paper over or carry them over in the meantime, this new facility supposedly coming in 2026, like, get your players better. Get better coaches to develop them. And that got to be an issue, obviously, with the receivers in the offensive line, as we highlighted, where veterans were complaining to me in the locker room, be like, man, we just need an offensive line. And then people on staff are going, I don't know how our coaches aren't getting more out of these players, because it's not that they're great, but they're good enough and they should have playing time, and they didn't earn it.
I mean, one thing that I heard late in the season was that a complaint from the front office was that coaches were focusing too much on short term. And I think that, like, the one big example was that DeMontre Jacobs was starting over Caden Wallace in week 18. But I think that you can also point to, let's say, like, Kendrick Bourne starting over Jalen Polk. Like, the Patriots wanted to win. They wanted to win now. They were focused too much on these short-term things, where I do think that you probably could develop young players a little bit more by playing them when the opportunity is there, and essentially benching Jalen Polk. Like, he kind of barely played over the last, 4 or 5 weeks of the season. That's obviously not going to help his confidence and help his development. And in the story, we had someone quoted as saying that, like, I think his frustration stemmed from not playing and not knowing a path onto the field. And you don't want to reward players for being bad or for complaining or being frustrated or anything like that. But, like, when you do draft a guy in the second round, you'd kind of like to know a little bit more about what you have by the end of the season. And I'm not trying to, like, make an excuse for the front office or Jalen Polk or anything like that. I do think that
you got to make it work. Like, whatever you're working with, you have to make it work better than it did. And it just didn't. And,
like, people around, I've said this too many times at this point, but, like, Jalen Polk was a projected second round pick. Like, it's not as if he was a 6th rounder who was taken in the second round. Like, people around the league liked Jalen Polk. So why didn't it work? And then, like, and I think that some of it is scouting, some of it is drafting, some of it is the front office. But I also do think that a large part of it is player development and not putting the players in position to develop as well.
So, Hurley, I'm going to ask you a question, then we got to take a break. But I think it's notable as we kind of, like, turn the page a little bit to Mike Vrabel. He's going to interview today. We're going to talk about there here in a second. Like, you get full power over the organization. Robert watched this and goes, Hurley, like, forget the guys who wrote that. F them. We look bad. You know better. And I want you to give me a to-do list for this organization to kind of get us up and out of here. And I think the starting point would be you let go of coaches who are probably gone soon enough. And some of them we identified. And it sucks. Like, I don't like saying Tyler Hughes or Scott Peters or named defensive assistant didn't do a good enough job, fire them. But that's the reality of the league. So if you get that call and the answer is, how do we fix this before we get to talk to Mike Vrabel and he comes in with his own ideas? How do you get the organizational rot out of here, Michael Hurley? His answer after this break. It's Game Time, the best secondary ticket marketplace you will find for one simple reason. They have a lowest price guarantee. I mean, you could do this even if you want to go to the Super Bowl. Find that exact seat. What's your view? Compare it to another one. But only at Game Time, where you get not only the seat view and the lowest price guarantee, but Game Time picks, where they give you all the best deals right up front, all in pricing. You don't even have to go searching for all these different deals. It's just the best of the best right there. You can find your tickets and go to the Super Bowl or any other event in less than 60 seconds. So what are you waiting for? Download the Game Time app today. Create an account. Use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase in these lifetime memories. Terms do apply. Again, just create an account. Use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, the best tickets, the lowest price guaranteed tickets to any game, concert, show, playoff, or regular season. Guaranteed. What time is it? Game Time.
Okay. It's funny you mentioned before I answer. I like to do other stuff before I answer your questions. It's very intriguing. It keeps people on their toes. But you mentioned like the assistants, they're not doing enough. Tyler Hughes being one of them. And I was thinking it speaks to the overall program when you get hyper focused on certain individual position coaches. Like if we think back, I mean, you guys were all intimately following. I don't know if that's too personal. You were closely following the Patriots during the second dynastic run. And there was guys like, Josh Boyer and Chad O'Shea, guys that you knew had roles, but you never were like, you know what? The Patriots are winning Super Bowls because of Chad O'Shea. It was just sort of part of Belichick's program. And I went back, I had to look up. Do you guys know who the 2004 wide receivers coach was on the Patriots? Trivia time.
2004. No, I know in 2007 it was Nick Caserio.
I did have to look this up, so I'm not trying to play smart guy, but it was interesting. His name was Brian Daboll, and he was a young up-and-coming assistant who, to that point, he had worked at William & Mary, Michigan State, and 2 years on defense.
Was he the tight ends coach too, Hurley? Because I was going to say Daboll, and I was like, it was
later on.
When he came back in like the teens, he was the tight ends coach when they started the second dynasty, but whatever. So I just feel like I agree. Like, and we talked about Scott Peters more than I anticipated this year, where you're like, I don't know what he's doing at practice, but I know that there aren't any results, and I know that there's not a lot of creativity. But anyways, when it comes to the organization, and this stuck out to me with Kraft talking the other day, is he feels, and I may be wrong, he feels married to Elliott Wolf. And to me, Elliott Wolf is someone, when Belichick got, when that ended last year, Elliott Wolf was there. He was the guy that was there. And Matt Groh, who I didn't expect to stick, he's still there. And it's just kind of like, you need to establish a vision and a culture of what you want. And the way that's going to happen is with a great football mind to run it. And so now you're in a tricky spot where if the head coach has something else, it's not ideal. I just think you want a vision from a president of football operations that works hand in hand with the head coach and can move forward. Could that happen with Elliott Wolf and Mike Vrabel or whoever gets the head coach? Sure, it could, but I just don't think it's ideal when you're just still sort of saying, well, he's here, so we're going to keep him.
I do think that there's room, like even with Elliott Wolf's title, I know other people have brought this up, but like I do feel like there's room for, let's say, like Vrabel to come in and be like, all right, but I want this guy to be my GM, to then name that guy like president of football operations, and then keep Elliott Wolf as executive vice president of player personnel, and like have someone come up over Wolf. And I don't know how Wolf would feel about that. Certainly would. Yeah, it would cost some money, but I mean, Wolf, I would assume, is also under a contract that the Patriots would have to pay him for, regardless of what happens to him. So I don't know. I mean, that's immediately when this happened, when I reached out to someone about Wolf, it was like, let's see what happens. Like, let's see what happens when the head coach comes in, because like there was a feeling that like this might not be the long-term thing for Wolf to be safe here. So I don't know what happens with it. I do think that there are like, there's a lot of qualms to be had about how the Patriots handled the offseason. And I do think it was smart to keep as much cap space as possible. But as I've mentioned recently, like even a lot of the re-signings have not panned out very well for the Patriots. Like you look at some of the guys whose contracts haven't even kicked in yet. You got Ramondre Stevenson, who's had 2 down years in a row now. Jelani Tavai's extension is not kicked in yet. That kicks in this year. And Devon Godshaw's extension kicks in this year. That is not kicked in yet. So like those are 3 guys who maybe you wouldn't want to move on from this year, because quite honestly, the Patriots need all of the NFL caliber players that they can get right now. But they're also not necessarily the players that you want to be tied to, where like it's years down the line before you can even release them without getting any cap savings. So at the time, it was pretty much universally liked that the Patriots were extending all of their own guys. But even some of those guys like Duggar hasn't worked out. Jabril Peppers that had extenuating circumstances. The biggest extenuating circumstances obviously were Christian Barmore, but even the ones that were supposed to be the safest re-signings haven't panned out the way that I think the front office would have hoped that they did.
Well, a couple things on Wolf. And someone who profiled him last spring and even heard more recently from executives who had worked with him or otherwise were around the league, there's a sense that I've gotten that he might be open to keeping the title, but essentially being demoted. Because at his heart, he's a scout. Like that's who he is. More than I want to command a room, more than I want to be the face of this, known for that. Like the man loves to evaluate football players, find good ones, put together a team, be part of a team. It's what he grew up in. That's what he wants to do. Is it something I would guarantee? No. But if I'm the Patriots, not out of a loyalty to Elliott Wolf or look at his resume over the last 11 months and be like, man, this was killer. It's just to say that I think that's a department in the front office, like the analytics staff, like the sports science staff, and probably the defensive staff coaching. You need more NFL caliber players. Yes, you need more NFL caliber minds in there. This front office needs to build out. So I don't think a swap of whomever Mike Vrabel theoretically wants to bring in, just replace him. Keep a guy who's been in NFL front offices for 2 decades, who's been an assistant GM, who's got connections that filled out a coaching staff, and a great one, granted. But I don't think getting him out of there is some sort of net positive. Not to mention, Doug, as you and I have talked before, the offensive line was a mess, a mistake, full stop, in real time, calling them out. You need better players in this. The draft, questionable. Looks bad, disastrous around Drake May. I still don't think it's fair, like a quarterback and a head coach, in most instances, to judge a GM in 1 year, especially when the goal is not to win. So I would say whether he stays or goes, whatever his role is, that front office needs to build out in a way. And I think there's an opening to do that, pending whatever Mike Vrabel says or doesn't say in his interview today and to ownership later on.
Lad McConkey Day, though, was a tough one for that day. The NFL Network just loved putting it on the screen. Here's the trade. Here's what the Patriots got in that trade. Yeesh. Here's what Lad McConkey's done. But I don't know. I wasn't saying get rid of him just for the sake of getting rid of him, but I just think it speaks to sort of going with what's there, and that's what they did. And they need to plan something. And I don't know. You don't have the freedom and time to do it right now that you might want otherwise. But I think there's less urgency than if they did get the number 1 pick, because that number 1 pick would be now the most important draft this franchise might ever have, where you're going to trade it and you need to nail it and you need to negotiate with guys that have done these things before and you haven't. Now at 4, I think they're going to pick and move along. So you got to get the pick right, but it's much less intricate than had they needed to make that deal.
For sure. We were talking about future of the franchise earlier. I just want to mention that I'm looking at the comments and we have multiple people saying that they want Joe Milton to be the starter over Drake May. So that's where we're at with the future of the franchise right now.
Yeah, the kids are all right. They got Milton. They'll be fine.
Hey, Robert Kraft, we got 2 quarterbacks.
See, that's where I don't have any issue with that comment. And I think people who do pods.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Anyway,
but I know you're not doing this, but it's happened. I'm like, give me a break. There was an amusing comment, clearly a joke for a guy who did not play any kind of snaps. If you are doing this, like, oh my God, how could Robert say this? Oh my God, is he starting a controversy? Get the hell all the way out of here. And then it's directed at fellow media members. It was an amusing comment. And otherwise was a tail between his legs press conference, as he deserved. And they need to do a lot of upgrades, as we talked about this whole podcast. Okay, Mike Vrabel's interviewing today. It is still widely expected, people around the league, inside the team, he probably gets the job. Couple of key points. How much money does he want? How does he want to rearrange the front office? Is he willing to flex leverage and potential interest from Las Vegas, where Tom Brady, I'm sure, would love to hire his old pal? Because the Patriots have cleared the decks. They have satisfied the Rooney Rule. They could do this as soon as they want, assuming they want to hire Mike Vrabel, and it is possible today. How much of that solves their problems, and what do you think the next 48 hours look like?
I think it would be big. I think that people who compare Jerod Mayo to Mike Vrabel, I think it's first of all, people who would just rather have an offensive-minded head coach, which is fine to say in itself. But I think that Vrabel and Mayo are just such completely different personalities. And the experience is so different. The ability to bring in staff is so different. The ability to attract staff is so different that, like, to boil it all down to, oh, these are 2 former Patriots linebackers. I don't want to use too strong of words, but it's silly, I would say. And it's probably in some cases in bad faith. So I think that is like, as far as a culture change goes, the Patriots would endure a major culture change with Mike Vrabel coming in. But I do still think like the Patriots 100% need to go through this process and talk to other people and take those other interviews seriously. And I don't want to harp on it too much because everyone's already done a better job than it of me so far. But bringing in Byron Leftwich and Pep Hamilton and seemingly trying to skirt the Rooney Rule obviously was a bad look. And I didn't love the way they did that. I think even if they had just like saved those interviews for next week, it would have looked a little bit better. And I would even say that people saying that like, oh, now that they've requested Aaron Glenn, like it doesn't look as bad. I kind of disagree because I think it was Albert Breer said this, like they're trying to skip the line for Mike Vrabel by doing this. And by being like, okay, well, we brought in 2 guys for in-person interviews. Now we can make the hire whenever we want. So it really is not taking the Rooney Rule seriously. So I just want to get that out of the way.
That interview, by the way, like I heard last night that wasn't on the books yet. So they might be too late.
Yeah, I
think so busy.
Yeah, I think someone said that. And like, yeah, because he's been requested by 6 different people. So like, and I was listening to Zoe and Bertrand today, and like I think it was Bertrand who was saying that like it's a little odd for the Patriots to request Ben Johnson and then a few days later be like, oh no, we're also requesting Aaron Glenn. Like if it had been, it does feel a little bit like it was in reaction to what people were saying about Leftwich and Hamilton. And I don't want to insult Leftwich and Hamilton by saying that like they were only brought in for this reason, but like they're both out of the league and neither one of them has ever been higher than an offensive coordinator.
That's another. I heard Bert on the radio today, and I didn't even thought about it because they changed the interviewing rules, as we know. That's why Ben Johnson is a virtual thing. You can't interview a coach on any team until after the divisional round.
Right.
So basically, to skirt the Rooney Rule, you have to find someone who's out of football.
Yes.
And yeah, like they're like Vrabel is technically out of football because his contract expired. I don't know. Bill Belichick is technically out of football, but generally speaking, there aren't a ton of people out of football that you're going to be like, I identify him as a real head coaching candidate. So that's what I mean, every year there's something about this that just sucks and is dehumanizing about the whole process. And I never have come up with the solution other than to say, man, that sucks for everybody involved.
I will say one more thing about this before we get off the topic. Is this kind of feels like it's like 3 straight years of this to some degree for the Patriots, because with the OC hire of Bill O'Brien, it seemed like Bill Belichick was just bringing in position coaches to see if they would want to join his staff. Like Adrian Crum was one of those guys.
He was.
So it was basically like bring in these guys that we want to see if they want to join the staff. And then we'll bring in Bill O'Brien. We'll hire Bill O'Brien and see if these other guys want to join. Then last year, everyone knew that Elliot Wolf was going to be the GM. And then they're like floundering to try to find people to bring in for interviews to try to fulfill the. So now this is like, it really does feel like this is 3 straight years of this. And that really is just a bad look. And obviously the Crafts want to do what they want to do. And in 2022 or whoever it was, Bill or the Crafts wanted to bring in Bill O'Brien and figure out the best way to do that. But I don't know. Every other team plays by the rules. And it seems like for the last 3 years, the Patriots haven't been.
So I want to set aside the Rooney Rule conversation and whether it's perfect or not or anything implications in there. It's not because I disagree with it. It's just I think you can have a conversation about the Patriots process and be upset about other things than, oh, they're skipping the line or they're flat. The rules are there. You make them work for you. You don't abide by that is the attitude I would take. If you want to go get your guy, go get him. But in the process of doing this, they've hurt themselves in 2 ways. Separate, again, from optics, from anything, diversity hiring practices related. Number one is when you conduct a search this way and you fire Jerod Mayo immediately after the game, don't bother to do it Monday. You signal to Mike Vrabel a kind of desperation. And when you bring in those coaches on Tuesday to say, yeah, we're just checking boxes. We want to get this done. We want to do it quickly. You weaken your bargaining position, your negotiating stance with Mike Vrabel, who is not the type of guy who, as Kraft has suffered from occasionally, to be blinded by sentiment. He's going to go in there. He's going to kick your ass. He's going to say, this is what I want. This is how we're going to do it. And you're going to like it or I'm going to walk. That's his type of approach. Number 2, in addition to weakening your bargaining position, as they talk probably right now, is you decline the opportunity to gather intel on yourselves. How do good coaches from good organizations, not only run themselves. Tell us your secrets. What do you think of us? Because they don't have that outside perspective. Elliot Wolf was a personification of splitting the baby last year. The outsider, Green Bay grown, who's actually now on the inside. We'll have a new system. That's great. He was still here. Okay. You don't have that perspective that any of the GM candidates would had they been interviewed in good faith, or other head coaching candidates that you're declining to interview. So you're shutting the door to more information and perspective and an organization that needs it in the worst way, because this has been a mom and pop shop and franchise for 25 years.
Before Michael, I just want to say real quick, it's actually 4 years in a row, because Matt Patricia was the pseudo offensive coordinator that they didn't name offensive coordinator, so they never had to go through an interview process. So actually 4 years in a row. Just wanted to correct myself real quick.
But he was super qualified though, so like that would have been unnecessary to make him.
He almost was a rocket scientist. Doug.
This is not a Matt Patricia podcast.
He also kept me up at night 2 nights ago, thinking he still had the best offense here of the last 3 years. How did that happen?
Let's not talk about that. You're also being an error repeater if you do that. You mentioned Jerod Mayo. That was something that he had done poorly. Robert Kraft multiple times said, I knew years ago Jerod Mayo would be my head coach. And then sure enough, you send Bill Packin and you just implant Mayo in there and it didn't work. Now you're saying, Vrabel's our guy. We want Vrabel. Go through the process. See, it's more, there's more out there than what you know. And there are people you've never met that could be very good at the job, that might impress you, that might wow you. And Andrew, you mentioned it where Vrabel could go in and sort of have demands and like sort of play hardball. He might have legitimate questions that the group in front of him might not have the right answers to. And he might be like, all right, well, I got some other interviews I'm going to go. Like, he might not be in love with this just because it's New England. Like, there's probably 5 legitimate concerns he's going to want to ask them about. And if they don't have good answers, he might not totally be, he might have a better time in Chicago or wherever else he might be interviewing. So I think that's another factor too, where it's like, if you put all your eggs in that basket and he turns you down, oof.
Yeah, then you might be scrambling. I mean, I do still think, so there's 6 jobs available right now. I do still think the Patriots are the most appealing of the bunch. And I think that you can debate back and forth between the Patriots and Bears. And this might just be me being like a New Englander by saying this, by having Drake May, $130 million in cap space, number 4 overall pick, and the record that they had last year. And I think you've got a serious chance to improve moving forward. I do think the Patriots are atop that list, but like Mike Vrabel interviewing with the Bears this week was certainly definitely very interesting, because that is what I would put as probably the number 2 best job right now. Just having Caleb Williams and having a better roster than the Patriots have right now. Maybe not the same level of draft capital or cap space, but they do have cap space. They do have draft capital. And the Raiders thing is very interesting to me as well. And like, that's not necessarily the most appealing job for most people. I think most people would probably put the Jaguars as number 3, but like just Tom Brady being the minority owner there, like he's got familiarity with Brady. I think Brady's probably going to be recruiting him hard if he really wants Vrabel. So that one's interesting to me too, where like, yeah, I think everyone does expect this job to be Vrabel's, for it to be, determined within the next 4 or 5 days, whatever it is. But I don't know. I don't know if it's a foregone conclusion. And like you guys were saying, there is a lot of questions that Vrabel would have to have. And I think also him coming in and being like, oh, well, everyone thinks that they want me to take this job. Like, he can have like some very specific demands that then the Patriots would have to fulfill, with him knowing like, yeah, I'm the front runner. I'm the guy that they want. I don't even know how seriously they're taking this process.
And I'm really curious where the line is for the Crafts, if there's a line at all, because someone I talked to last night said, I'd expect this to go another 20, 48 hours at least, but we don't know how this conversation is going to go, or if the Crafts' desperation is as it looks. And in that case, it might be, here's a blank check. Sure, Elliott's gone, but where do they draw the line, if at all? Because if it is at Wolf, you could argue whether that's a mistake or not. And it probably would be. I say, just give Mike Vrabel the keys, give him whatever he wants, because you can say this too, like, oh, he's not a perfect coach. He's the best head coaching candidate on the market. Like, the guy's got a winning record. He's got experience in this job. There will be no learning curve. He will be better than what you saw in Tennessee. And what you saw in Tennessee was pretty good, not just from a record standpoint, but the way he raised the floor. And you're not going to have issues like week 17, your defense going, our tackling is not so good, and we can't really fit the run. Like, what a bummer. No, that's not going to happen here. So you want the best head coaching candidate. It's just, I'm fascinated by the negotiation, how I think the Patriots have blown it to this point, at least publicly, and not even like, oh, these are bad PR optics. Like, no, the messages you sent to him the way you've acted and gone about this only embolden a guy who doesn't need to be emboldened to try and get what he wants. And look, if he gets the job, which is what he wants, and they hire him, everyone's happier and will be better off for it and move forward. And then it's on to his staff, which is a big question mark because Drake May is in his second year, rookie contract, all that. They need to nail the OC hire almost as much as the head coaching hire.
I will say at least it's not the Raiders situation, because I was thinking about Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. They have this conversation, that was reported on yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
You know that neither guy had no reason to tell anyone about it. They could have that. But Mark Davis was like, "Hey, Tom Pelissero, guess what's going on here? Well, can you believe it? Bill and Brady." And it's just like, oh my God. And then they had to walk it back like immediately. So I do think, can I bring up my red flag on Vrabel, which I know I've brought up today?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
The year was 2020. The Titans were coming off an excellent season where Derrick Henry ascended to an otherworldly level. They beat the Patriots in the playoffs. They go to Kansas City. They probably should have won, but they blew it. They had an opportunity to bring in Tom Brady. Instead, presumably with a strong influence by the head coach, they said, no. We want Ryan Tannehill. We're going to give him a new deal at 20. Tom Brady, we don't want him to throw to A.J. Brown and hand the ball to Derrick Henry. That's stupid. And do you know what? Lo and behold, it didn't work out. The offense got worse because Ryan Tannehill, it wasn't very good. And so that I know every team in the league did that, but that to me stood out. Like Vrabel, Tom, what he can do to an org. Like, I think no matter, to a certain degree, no matter where Brady went that year, they were going to win. And the Titans were just as ready to win as the Bucs were. I mean, they maybe more because they went to the playoffs. They were a good team. So I don't know. His offensive philosophy, I guess, is what I'm getting at. I'm kind of joking, but also not, because you went with Tannehill over Brady. And that, to me, I would need to understand why, other than Tannehill had a good year.
I think that's fair. I think, fortunately, the Patriots don't have that decision to make this offseason unless you think that he's going to be deciding between Drake May and Joe Milton, which who knows? That's what the comments are saying.
Non-zero chance, though, that the Crafts call Tom Brady and like, "Hey, you want to come back just for a game? Like, we really need the win here optically. Like, you're still loose, plenty pliable. Week 18 next year. Come on, let's go."
I think he could have 3 jobs. I think he could do Fox. He could be a Raiders minority owner and then also the Patriots quarterback. I think, like, if he can handle 2, he can handle, what's a 3rd job, really, in the grand scheme of things. But I will say, obviously, there's the concern of bringing in a defensive head coach and going through the offensive coordinator cycle. But Mike Vrabel did have a decent track record of hiring offensive coordinators during his time.
Excellent.
Matt LaFleur, good offensive coordinator, gets hired by the Packers. Almost too good. Arthur Smith, good, decent offensive coordinator for the Titans. He gets hired away by the Falcons. Then when you're on your 3rd choice, it doesn't go as well with Todd Downing. But I think that does show to some degree that he's got, a decent mind for what he wants in an offensive coordinator. We'll see what that means here. There's been the rumors about Josh McDaniels. Ultimately, though, like with this head coaching search, it does feel like maybe ownership sees that they need the highest floor candidate possible right now in order to get fans back, in order to get their franchise back in order. Like, I do think in some ways Ben Johnson might be the higher ceiling guy, but I also think that there's a much lower floor with him. And I know that there's a lot of conversation with Patriots fans about which one you want more, but I don't think you can really deny that Vrabel does bring that higher floor for the team this season. And honestly, like that, the franchise wants to win a Super Bowl, but they also need to get fans back. They need to get fan support back. They need to get everything back in the building. And I think that that's one major thing that Vrabel would provide.
Right where that 16-0 banner used to be, they can hang one next year that just says higher floor, and everyone would be like, "Yeah, we did it,
9 wins."
Ben Johnson is going to interview, we expect, it's been reported, virtually on Friday. And then TBD after that, pending if Aaron Glenn actually accepted. And maybe it did since we've been talking.
I have confirmed, by the way, that Ben Johnson will interview on Friday.
Oh, good. There we go. So there's a plan. I still would choose Vrabel. I don't think Ben Johnson is some sort of consolation prize. It's just more of a mystery. And after going through a first-year head coach and seeing all of the pitfalls there, granted, Jerod Mayo is very different than Ben Johnson, who has more than twice the coaching experience in his entire life than Jerod does. I just think you take the best guy available. And Josh McDaniels, it should be noted too, not a flight risk because no one is calling for him to come be their head coach anymore after the way things went with Denver.
Another guy who's out of football, by the way.
Yeah, another guy who's out of football, exactly. And I think the Crafts would welcome to come back. Let's end on this. You get one message that you get to deliver personally. Maybe, Doug, you can do this. It could be to anyone in the organization based on what we heard, based on the coaching search. It could be Mike Vrabel. It could be Ben Johnson. Please take this advice. Who is that person? What is that advice? And if you've got any thoughts on how you think this will wrap up in the next, few days with the coaching search, feel free to drop those as well.
Wow, you're really putting me on the spot here.
We can go with Hurley, though.
I'll go first with a quick one.
Yeah,
I
sure.
can go really quick, and it's what's it called when you have a bias, a recency bias?
Yeah.
I would go to Cole Strange. I'd be like, dude, when you snap in the shotgun, it's just a quick movement. You want the ball to just go in a straight line, not like a lollipop. So I'm a coach. We did it.
I mean, I guess it would be to ownership and just to take this job search seriously. Like, I know that that's a generic answer, and it's one that we've already discussed, but like, I do think that, as you're saying, Andrew, like, you need to look at outside choices. You can't just always hire the guy that you know. And ultimately, we've made the case that like Vrabel could very much still be the best option. But you also know at this point that other teams haven't accelerated through the Rooney Rule by bringing in. So like, you do also have time. Like, you don't need to rush this so much because you actually are aware of what other teams are doing out there. So even if you have to wait a week or whatever it is to talk to Aaron Glenn, I think it might be two. I don't know how long it would be at this point, but like, go through the process, talk to everyone, see what they have to say, see what their vision is, see if it aligns with yours, and then just make the best choice.
My real answer real quick. And it
doesn't
sounds like,
yeah.
Well, I mean, he should learn how to shotgun snap. That was ridiculous. And this was reported a month or so ago. I forget who did. I don't know if anyone's present. It was that the Crafts were kind of calling around asking about how to nurture this offensive whiz kid, and they have in Drake May. And I would say continue that, because this league, you are nothing without that quarterback. If you have another dysfunctional season, and that's why, like you mentioned, Ben Johnson having more of a lower floor. Like, let's say Ben Johnson ends up being a great coach. He still could go 3-14 next year, and it could create more sort of muck here that you don't want. Nurture that quarterback. Don't kowtow to him. I don't think he's a diva. He is like sort of like a 1 in a million shot where he has the talent and not the ego yet, at least. Make sure that that's okay, because if you screw it up again, and I know Mac Jones had a lot to do with that himself, but if you go through another cycle, you're just constantly spinning your wheels. So I'm not saying coddle the kid, but like, make sure it works with Drake May here.
Michael, that just reminded me that you posted someone got hit in the nuts in a college basketball game the other day.
Yeah, it was a Duke player got hit. So I think it was just karmic retribution for all of the nut shots.
Yeah, single person.
That was wild, though.
Not a single person shed a tear for that said Duke player. Can we call it the Mac Tap? Is it too far gone? Is it not relevant enough if we change it from the Sack Tap to the Mac Tap?
We never got the right angle on the Mac Sack Tap of Sauce Gardner to like have it become a meme. You know, it just sort of, there was too many bodies and arms. And it's like, damn, we'll never get the full footage. So I don't know. It was I think he missed also in this one. I think he only got like a piece of the package. So it wasn't a full on, you sunk my battleship situation.
That was beautifully put by you. That was poetry on the pod. Look, I'm telling Mike Vrabel, walk away today. You know, like if you want to do this the right way, if you want to have your second shot at a head coaching job, and you know you're probably going to get this, make those demands. Don't agree to anything right now. You know they're desperate. Put the screws to the crafts a little bit. Like, there needs to be fundamental, elemental change for this organization, and that can be true, as well as the fact that Jerod failed miserably this year as a head coach who was put in a no-win situation. But if you don't want to fail, if you want to maximize whatever the future is, the Patriots need to catch up to the modern league, and they're not there right now. So if you're Mike Vrabel, you can come in with those demands, and maybe they acquiesce. Okay, great. Well, now I want more, and I'm going to walk away, and I'll let you know over the weekend. That would be my message in these negotiations, which I just so fascinated by. Also,
Andrew, are you sure you're not just saying that because you don't want to write about a new head coach tonight?
I was
Is
getting
this
there. I was like, I
selfish
would
on
love
your
to have a
part?
beer at a bar and watch Penn State Notre Dame and just relax. Granted, I will have my backpack in case something happens and you and I need to go confirm, make calls, more texts. But it's been a long few days. If you haven't read the story, it's in the BostonHerald.com. Doug and I have tweeted about it and sent it out there. Everything you would want to know about the 2024 season, Jerod Mayo, culture stuff, crafts, everything is in there. Everything that we've learned. And where can they find you guys for Pat's Chat?
Just go to Pat's Chat. Just search Pat's Chat. You'll find it. No,
I should have put
YouTube.
I should have put my
podcast.
Twitter name in. What a clown.
Yeah, you're just Michael Hurley.
Out bad. Patriots fans can also watch Abdul Carter tonight, future Patriots pass rusher off the edge. So
that's big. Oh, there you go. Now you got your name in there. Your Twitter handle in there.
My bad. Boom.
But yeah, no, I'm at Doug Cott on Twitter, Pat's Chat. And then Andrew, for Pat's Chat listeners, where can people find Pat's Interference?
Yeah, YouTube, my Twitter, Spotify, Apple, and I don't know. Like I've got a YouTube channel that I don't really do a whole lot with, but this podcast will be there too. So Pat's PATS Interference twice a week in the off season. Doug very often. So if you like this, you're gonna love a lot more of that coming forward. And early, we'll do this again.
Yeah. Do you ever do it solo?
Oh yeah,
Those
it's
are
Monday
tough.
nights, and it's a lot of self-loathing. We have a segment
Yeah.
where Andrew talks to himself and drinks alone just to get through some of the film because it's like
I've done
45
that
minutes
before.
stuff. It's
You gotta like
look, yeah. Go ahead.
You just gotta take a shower after and just pretend it never happened. That's all.
It gets better, and this is not like any kind of suffering, but you really like at the end are just like, what did I just do? But granted, it's like you watch the film, write about it. You might as well share it, answer some mailbag questions, and get it out of there. But these are a lot more fun. Like
I feel like you have to take a lot of pregnant pauses when you're doing it on your own. Just leave a lot of space.
You've got to do the John Oliver thing too, where like you're delivering real information in the monologue, but unless you just interject with some like toucan reference or some obscure thing that you say just to change the pace and keep it up with like your tone or the information, it's
or you get a little parched and you're like, and now as you see, I'm going to take a sip of water.
it's definitely always water.
Now I can continue speaking.
Yeah, no, solo hosting a little bit different. All right, thank you guys for everyone who listened and watched. Hope you enjoyed. Please give Pat's Chat 5-star rating, reviews everywhere you can find them. And Pat's Interference, whatever you feel like. We earn what we get. See you guys.